What is going on, Raider Nation? It's your boy Sanjit back at it with another video. Today, I want to talk about some of the UDFAs that the Las Vegas Raiders picked up. I don't know every single one of these guys, and I haven't watched the tape on a lot of these guys, but I have watched the tape on at least 3 of them prior to the Raiders bringing them in, and I liked at least 2 of them. Like, I really liked 2 of them. I want to talk about this. I think the Las Vegas Raiders did a pretty damn good job in the draft, and even with the UDFAs, I really like the upside on some of these guys. So we're going to talk about it. I do want to state this. I don't want to actually give you guys any sort of draft grades or anything like that. When it comes to the actual guys that we've selected, I think I'll wait a day or two to kind of finish evaluating the tape of all those guys, right? Byron Young, for example, is one of the guys that I really want to watch tape on before I really judge that draft. And I haven't gotten to him. Something came up today, so I wasn't able to do that. But let's talk about some of these guys. First and foremost, the Raiders have picked up a bunch of guys. You guys can see them right now on the list, but there's more guys that will probably bring in over the next couple of days, and we'll probably bring in some free agents as well, some guys that are still kind of available. But I want to start this off right away talking about the one guy that I'm very excited for. That's going to be guard McClendon Curtis at Chattanooga. If you guys don't know who McClendon Curtis is, that's okay. Most people don't know who he is. But I kind of want to just give you guys a background story of how I came across this guy. I followed him last year. He followed me back, and I've been kind of talking to him over the past couple of months. And surprisingly, he didn't get drafted. And surprisingly, he also came to the Raiders, which is awesome for us because I think this guy has the potential to be one of the very good guards. Let's talk about this guy. First and foremost, how I came across McClendon Curtis is I was actually watching tape of Cole Strange, who also went to UTC. Cole Strange was the first round guard that the Patriots took in last year's draft class. He was the pick that Sean McVay kind of made fun of, right? He said, oh, we thought we were going to get this guy in the 3rd round. That was Cole Strange. So Cole Strange was the starting left guard at Chattanooga, and McClendon Curtis was a starting right guard at that same school. Cole Strange is a dominant player, right? Worthy of that 1st round pick. McClendon Curtis, on the other hand, is a very solid player as well. And UTC has some good offensive linemen. The reason why they're producing these guys that are coming into the NFL is because of the coaching. The offensive line coach there is a very solid coach. And you can see that in McClendon Curtis's game. Now, he obviously wasn't drafted. And a lot of people are going to say, well, if you're not drafted, how good could you actually be? Here's the thing with Curtis here. And kind of with guards in general. McClendon Curtis doesn't have a whole lot of versatility, right? And what I mean by that is he can't play tackle, guard, and center, right? He can't do that. He's primarily a true guard. And for the Raiders, that's what he's going to be. Now, obviously, that puts him at a disadvantage, right? Because nowadays, most coaching staffs want their offensive linemen to be versatile. But the thing with McClendon Curtis is he's a really good scheme fit for the Raiders. He's powerful. He's strong as hell. He's one of those guys that, in my opinion, you want on your roster. 328 pounds, 6'6", so he has really good size. He did play left tackle in the past, right? So that is something that he's kind of done. But he is primarily a guard, right? I think he played left tackle this past season. But he is a guard, right? He's not playing tackle for the Raiders. I'd be very shocked if he somehow transitioned, to competing for that right tackle spot. But we'll get into that in just a second because the Raiders picked up another guy on the offensive line. We'll talk about him in a second as well. But just to wrap it up with McClendon Curtis, I think this guy out of the UDFAs has the best shot to make the active roster. And if it's not the active roster, it wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't make the active roster. But I would expect the Raiders to keep this guy around. I think bringing this guy in is very beneficial, and I think the Raiders did a really good job bringing him in. He's a guy that, again, I watched film on. He's a guy that I have confidence in. And I watched him last year, liked him over the course of this year, but even then, he went to the Senior Bowl and he crushed the Senior Bowl. In my opinion, him and Alabama left tackle Tyler Steen, who ended up going to the Philadelphia Eagles, he was at the Senior Bowl as well, but he went from left tackle in college. Senior Bowl transitioned him into a guard. I think Tyler Steen and McClendon Curtis were the 2 best offensive linemen on the inside at the Senior Bowl. In fact, I think McClendon Curtis was better than Cody Mock, who actually got drafted high, right, by, I believe, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I have a lot of faith in McClendon Curtis, and I'm glad the Raiders brought him in. I think he's going to definitely prove some people wrong. Now, I said I don't think he'll be a tackle for the Raiders, right? As you guys know, the Raiders may look to bring in a right tackle. Obviously, we do have Jermaine Illuminar. We do have Brandon Parker. We're not sure if those guys are the long-term answers at tackle. Some people thought the Raiders may draft one in the first round. Obviously, that didn't happen. Now, they did bring in Dalton Wagner out of Arkansas, and I want to talk about this guy. You know, talk about being physical, tough, you know, wanting to put someone down into the ground and spit on them as they're on the floor. That's Dalton Wagner, man. The guy is aggressive as hell. I posted a clip yesterday, which definitely got taken out of context by a lot of people. But that post was basically Wagner down blocking on the Raiders' third round pick, Byron Young out of Alabama. That was Dalton Wagner laying his ass out, and it got taken out of context. You know, I post clips all the time. It doesn't mean anything. It's just one rep, right? But Dalton Wagner is one of those guys that is tough. He's strong, and he has great size. Wagner is 6'9", 331 pounds. You guys can see PFF gave him the 2022 First Team All-SEC award. That's a pretty damn high ranking award. That's saying that in the SEC, he was the best right tackle, or, you know, he was the first team right tackle, which is crazy to think because Darnell Wright, I believe Tennessee, is in the SEC as well. So that's kind of a shock to me that they thought Dalton Wagner is better than Darnell Wright. I mean, I don't agree with that at all. Wright was obviously the second tackle taken, I think, 10th overall by the Chicago Bears in the first round. Wagner obviously, didn't get drafted as well. But if it's not PFF, the AP, right, the Associated Press had him as the second team All-SEC. So that's pretty damn good as well, right? Second team means he was basically the third ranked tackle in the SEC by AP. So Associated Press. That's pretty damn good for me. I do like Wagner. I like his upside. And these are two of the guys that I've actually watched tape on, and they're two guys that I've actually liked. Truth be told, when I was watching the center at Arkansas, if you guys don't know who that is, that's Ricky Stromberg. I think he got drafted. Can't remember who drafted him. But Ricky Stromberg ended up getting drafted. So that was the guy that I was actually watching the tape on. And that's when this right tackle started sticking out. Now, I don't think Wagner is as good as McClendon Curtis. I think Curtis is a better player at his position than Wagner is at his position, right? I would say Curtis is definitely better. But Wagner has upside. Now, he will have to continue to develop. He will have to continue to get stronger, and definitely just continue to get better, right? But I do like the physicality he brings. I do like that nastiness, that characteristic. I mean, just look at the guy's picture, right? Look at the picture here. He looked physical as hell, right? So this is a guy that I definitely like, and I think the Raiders did right by bringing in both of those offensive linemen. I know some people are going to say, well, did we really address right tackle? And I would say probably not, right? But we did bring in a guy, Dalton Wagner, that does provide us some upside. Honestly, I'd probably, Jermaine Illuminar is likely going to be the starting right tackle. You know, we talked about him all last year, how he absolutely crushed it. I would be surprised if he doesn't start for the Raiders. But outside of Illuminar, I can see a guy like Dalton Wagner beating out a guy like Brandon Parker, especially if Wagner is able to provide some upside, right? I think you'd rather keep the guy that could be on a rookie contract than a guy who is, year 5 or 6, hasn't really proven that he could take that next step. Although, do keep in mind, last year, Brandon Parker was expected to be the Raiders' starting right tackle, so we'll see what ends up happening in that instance, right? But yeah, those are the two offensive linemen that I've actually watched tape on prior to the Raiders bringing them in. The other guy that I watched tape on is safety Jaden Grant out of Oregon. That's the guy we're going to talk about next. Grant's a very interesting prospect. Not the biggest guy, not the strongest guy, but he is one of those guys that's kind of interesting in my opinion. Grant is 6 feet. I don't see his weight listed here, but he is 6 feet. He is one of those guys that's interesting to me because, some people said that this guy could have been drafted. Obviously, a lot of guys could have been drafted. But the difference between being drafted like in the 6th, 7th round and being a UDFA isn't that big, right? Honestly, 30% of the NFL is UDFA. So some of these guys here are going to make the Raiders roster, right? I think one or two of these guys is going to make the active roster. Another one or two will be on the practice squad. I think Jaydon Grant has the potential to be on our practice squad. He's smart. He's one of those guys that's smart. You know, I always talk about this. You know, anytime I watch tape, one of the things I look for is a guy situationally smart. Like, does he understand the concept of what's kind of happening in front of him? And Jaydon Grant is one of those guys that understands what's happening in front of him. I watched his tape. He was the third guy that I actually had watched in the past. He is a guy that I did like, you know, potentially going like the 5th round or around there. Surprisingly, he didn't get drafted, but there are other guys that I was surprised that didn't get drafted. Honestly, McClendon Curtis was, for me, the biggest surprise that he wasn't drafted. I honestly thought this guy would be gone like the 3rd or 4th round. But the fact that Osiris Torrance slipped into like the late 2nd, as did even Steve Avila didn't get picked until like 12 picks into the 2nd round. So we didn't see a lot of interior offensive linemen go until like the 2nd to 3rd round. So I guess I wasn't surprised at McClendon Curtis not being drafted, right? Guards aren't ranked that high, but I do think Jaydon Grant has the potential to make the Raiders roster. He is a guy I like. He is a safety. Obviously, the Raiders also drafted a safety, I believe, in the 5th round in Christopher Smith. Love that pick, by the way. We'll talk about all that tomorrow. I just want to kind of go through the UDFAs for today's video. Let's get into the next guy. We got a linebacker in Drake Thomas out of NC State. I can't remember who it was on Twitter, but it's someone that I definitely respect his eye for football. He liked this guy a lot, and to him, he was, you know, I think this was the guy he was saying that he was most excited that the Raiders brought in. This was one of his guys. I'll be honest, I haven't watched this tape, and even up until today, I still haven't watched this tape, so I'll hold off on you know, actually making that statement of what I think about this guy. In fact, the guys from here forward, I haven't watched any of them, but I do want to discuss it, right? It's kind of how these guys impact the Raiders. Obviously, a linebacker in Drake Thomas, that's massive for the Raiders, right? The Raiders need to get linebackers. We need to get guys that are going to potentially come in and help the Raiders linebackers, right? Denzel Perryman is gone. I think he signed with the Panthers. The Raiders do have Divine Diablo, but he's coming back from injury, and honestly, he's still trying to learn the linebacker position, right? He's really just 3rd year being a linebacker. So this is really that year for him to really showcase if he's the future. And then we got some young guys, and I think we got 1 or 2 other guys that are kind of vets. But we got a lot of young guys. So hopefully some of these younger guys could step up and make something happen for the Raiders. All right, we did obviously draft another linebacker yesterday. Again, we'll talk about that later. But as NFL.com said, this guy's a candidate for bottom of the roster or practice squad. So that's good enough for me, man. Let's go ahead and get to the next guy here. We got Adam Plant Jr., who is a defensive lineman. I think he's more of an edge. He's 260 pounds. He's 6'5", so he has good size. He did go to UNLV, but I believe he transferred over from TCU. So he did have, you know, he did play a little bit at TCU, and then he came over to UNLV. He had 12.5 quarterback sacks as a Rebel. That's pretty damn good, if you guys ask me. 12.5 sacks. So he was definitely one of the better players for UNLV. So this is one of the guys that I'm actually very excited to watch his tape. You know, I always look for guys with hand-to-hand technique, and if this guy has it, I'll see it right away, and I'll report back at that point. But the Raiders did bring in another defensive end. Obviously, we have the guy we took in the 1st round, Tyree Wilson, as the only defensive end that we brought in, and then this is obviously the 2nd guy we brought in. And there was actually a 3rd guy. I think it's Brock Martin here. He's a defensive end as well. He is out of OSU, so Oklahoma State. So this one's interesting. Obviously, we'll see how, you know, these guys kind of, you know, if they're able to make the roster, or if it's not the roster, at least stick on the practice squad. I think that would be massive for the Raiders as well. Brock Martin, Oklahoma State, as well as Adam Plant Jr. Obviously, Adam to me is a little bit more interesting because of his size, 6'5", 260. You don't got the weight here for Brock Martin, but he is 6'3", so we'll see how that kind of translates. The Raiders brought in 2 tight ends as well. One is George Tackas out of Boston College. I love Boston College. They always produce some great offensive linemen, or blockers, I should say, right? So this could be a guy that's potentially a blocker, although I'm not 100% sure. Haven't watched his tape. We will check that out. But then we brought in another tight end. This one is John Samuel Shenker. And this one's kind of interesting because this guy was voted as a team captain for his squad. So this one comes from Auburn. If you're being voted as a team captain as a tight end, that definitely means something about yourself. And he's not very, like, he isn't that great when it comes to catching the football. Like, statistically, I think he only had like 200 yards this past year. Statistically, if you guys scroll down here, 208 total yards receiving this past year. He did have one kick return for 8 yards, probably an onside or something to that tune. And he did have a couple carries, one for -5 yards, and then he had one for positive 2 yards against Georgia. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, just another interesting player that the Raiders bring in, 2 tight ends. Not sure if these guys are going to make the roster, to be honest, because obviously we drafted a tight end in Michael Mayer in the 2nd round. And we also signed 2 more tight ends in OJ Howard and Austin Hooper. So we already got 3 tight ends. I think it's a long shot for either of these 2 guys to make it for the Raiders, but they did bring in 2 tight ends. Lastly, Azizi Hearn, I think that's how you say his name, defensive back at a UCLA. Kind of an interesting football player. He participated in the 2022 spring training, and he earned a spot on the athletic director's honor roll in spring of 2022. That's kind of interesting. Haven't watched his tape at all, to be honest. But he was named 2nd team all conference by PFF, so that's definitely kind of interesting. It means he was one of the better players in his conference. So we'll see what ends up happening. Obviously, for the Raiders, if you're going to bring in guys, they got to be the best guys in their conference, the best guys on the team, because, you know, there's 50 players on every single team. There's more than that, actually, probably like 80 players per team. And you get, what, 15 to 20 guys that are graduating, trying to enter the league per team. There's, 100 teams? Like, you got so many guys coming out. So it is interesting. I actually do like the free agent pickup class for the Raiders, the UDFA specifically. If you bring in guys and you can at least find 2 guys that can contribute to your team, even if they're just practice squad guys forever, right? Or they spend like 5 years coming in and out of camp, I think that's good value at the end of the day, right? A lot of the guys that the Raiders have drafted haven't even lasted 5 years. Our 1st round picks haven't lasted 5 years, right? So if any of these UDFA guys can give us 5 years, I think that would be massive for the Raiders. I do like McClendon Curtis, and I do like Dalton Wagner. You guys know I'm an offensive line guy, so expect some film breakdowns on both of those guys. Probably Wagner sooner rather than later. I think how I'm going to do it is I might even just do a Tyree Wilson film breakdown tomorrow. Not 100% sure how I want to handle it. I don't have a limited amount of time, but I do want to try knocking out at least like 2 to 3 film breakdowns this week on this channel specifically. Wagner is going to be one of those guys for sure. So just expect that right at the top. Let me know what you guys think, man, about the UDFA specifically. And I'll give you guys my thoughts and opinions on the non-UDFAs tomorrow, because I think that's massive. I think that's the big thing for it. So let me know what you guys think, man. I hope you guys have a great rest of your Sunday. Enjoy your Monday, and I will see you guys next time with another video.